Here on the SDH Network. I am Jason Longshore. Thanks for jumping in as we recap the NWSL Championship match. North Carolina Courage, Chicago Red Stars. We'll also talk about some of the changes that were just announced by the NWSL at the end of the week about the upcoming salary structure, the addition of allocation money for the first time, also a little bit of news and rumor from around the league, and we'll dig in really briefly at the end to preview the upcoming week with the U.S. women's national team back in action and a couple of friendlies, the first ones under new manager Vlatko Andonovski. Let's start with last Sunday's NWSL Championship match. It was played at Solon Stadium at WakeMed Soccer Park in Cary, North Carolina. The hosts, the North Carolina Courage, the defending NWSL champions, the defending and current NWSL Shield winners, well, they did another double, and it was in emphatic fashion, 4-0 over the Red Stars last Sunday. Debinha, your match MVP, opened the scoring in the 4th minute. Jess McDonald added to the lead in the 26th minute. It was the third goal that was deep in first half stoppage time that felt like the backbreaker for Chicago. Crystal Dunn scored in the 5th minute of stoppage time to conclude the first half, and then Sam Mewis added goal number 4 in the 61st minute. The Courage outshot Chicago 21-13, and they really dominated the midfield with their box midfield that Paul Riley is so well known for. 2 holding midfielders sitting behind 2, but also the front 2, Lynn Williams and Jess McDonald, both incredibly active, whether it's flaring out wide or tracking back to defend. We saw Jess McDonald put in dangerous crosses. We also saw Lynn Williams chase Sam Kerr down defensively. Complete performance from the North Carolina Courage, and they have set that bar as the best in the NWSL and potentially the best club in the world. FIFA Women's Club World Cup. It needs to happen. The International Champions Cup on the women's side is great. A FIFA Club World Cup is a necessity at this point. Looking forward to that happening in the coming years. Chicago, they dearly missed defender Tierna Davidson. She suffered a high ankle sprain in training 3 days before the match. It took away really any of the tactical variations that manager Rory Dames might have had. You could have moved Julie Ertz into the midfield if you had Davidson. You didn't have that possibility, and Ertz and the back line for Chicago was just overrun because of that domination in the midfield by North Carolina. It's the third NWSL championship in 4 years for the club, including their 2016 title as the Western New York Flash. Let's hear from somebody who was there, the woman who called the match for ESPN. Jenn Hildreth caught up with our own John Nelson earlier this week.
Welcome back to the show, and it's time to catch up with a friend of the network who really, I'm trying to think, have you reached platinum status yet in anything, Jen?
I haven't yet. I have my diamond carrying over from last year, but I think I'm getting close. Yes, it's been a lot.
Okay.
It's been busy.
One of the voices of the Women's World Cup on FOX, and then now you get to add an NWSL championship again to the resume. Jenn Hildreth, friend of the network. Jen, thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah, thanks for talking some women's soccer.
Okay, so let's go back and talk about what the atmosphere was like in Cary leading up to kickoff. And obviously the best news that came out before the match even started was it was a sellout at just over 10,000 at WakeMed.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I mean, and the weather gods looked out for us. Thank you, Mother Nature. We were all looking at all these thunderstorms that were supposed to be coming through that day. The only thing was it was very hot and very humid, hence why we had hydration breaks in the NWSL Championship. But it was as great an atmosphere as you could have. And I mean, we've had NWSL Championships in Portland, which of course is a wonderful place for women's soccer and soccer in general. And they average over 20,000 a match for their regular season matches. But this 10,000 it felt really big. It felt like the big game that it was. And I didn't realize this until later, actually, thinking about it, but it was actually the first time a team was able to win the NWSL Championship on their home field. So that definitely helped in terms of the celebratory feel afterward as well.
When you look at the North Carolina Courage in the championship game, when Jason and I were discussing this on Soccer Down Here, the word that came to mind for me was relentless when it came to their approach going up against Chicago in the championship. Is that close to being the right adjective in your mind?
I don't know if you can narrow it down to one, but that is definitely one I would use for this team. And they keep coming at you, and they come at you from all different directions. I mean, they just are going to pummel you, and how teams handle that, how they choose to either absorb or attack that is key in how the match will go. I mean, if you think about in the semifinal, with Reign FC in there, and that team, which has had so many injuries and expects their coach to be part of a big announcement here very soon for U.S. Soccer, but with the work that Vlatko Andonovski did, was just so incredible with that team. And they went toe-to-toe. They absorbed all that relentless pressure in the semifinal until the 88th minute. They gave up a penalty kick. Of course, that semifinal wound up going to overtime. It was incredible. North Carolina then poured on 3 more goals in overtime to win and make it to the final, and they did not stop scoring, picking it up in the 4th minute of the final. And if you get down on North Carolina, it already feels like they're coming downhill at you most of the time, I think. Then it must feel like they're just on a roller coaster and you're at the bottom and you're just waiting for them to crash into you.
And when Jason and Jessica Charman discussed North Carolina Courage on the show, you look at how Paul Riley has assembled this roster, and there are national team talents there, but it's not a New York Yankees situation where you're paying high salaries, bringing in all the high star talent. It's a lot of tremendous players who are there to do their job, who are national team worthy when they're called up. I mean, this is about as balanced a side past 1 through 11, I'm talking like 18, 20, 22, 23, that you've ever really seen in this league.
I think so. I mean, I asked Allie Wagner that question on the broadcast if she thought it was the greatest team we had seen in NWSL, and I think actually North Carolina probably went on the attack, and she wasn't able to answer it at the time. That happened a lot the time that I asked it, so I actually don't recall that she answered it, but I would go on the record as saying that. Absolutely. And I mean, and it goes all the way back to the core of this group. 10 of the players on this current North Carolina team were on the 2016 team that was based in Western New York with Paul Riley. And that team won the NWSL Championship. He lovingly refers to them as the Bad News Bears. They went, 9-6-5 in the regular season that year, and then just found a way to win in very dramatic fashion. Penalty kicks, overtime in the playoff matches that year. And that core group has just continued to get better and build. But I think you do bring up a great point in the current structure of NWSL, which we could see changing, but in the current structure with the limits that are put on the teams and how they're able to structure their rosters and with the salaries that they have to keep under a certain amount, it is amazing what he has done. And you look at all of these players and the depth, as you said, there are obviously the international players, 7 of them who were at the World Cup for the North Carolina Courage this past summer, 4 of those on the U.S. team. But beyond those players are others that still play such a key role. But I do think it's those big superstars, and they really are. They're just not they're not the Sam Kerrs, they're not the Martas or the Alex Morgans. But Crystal Dunn's pretty high up there, and this is just, it's a destination, I think, where players want to come and play. And they've shown that they can win. I mean, similar to really what Atlanta United has done and the way that they came out with a bang in MLS. It's been similar for North Carolina since the Courage started 3 years ago. 3 straight regular season titles and now 2 NWSL championships.
I mean, it's, no matter where you turn, you're sitting there, and it's Williams, it's Dabinia, it's Dahlkemper, it's Mewis, it's Ursag. I mean, it's every place you turn, there is someone who is worthy of A, their spot, and B, their spot nationally, and C, their spot internationally. I mean, it's when you look at, I guess, for carrying on the example, for what Buttermaker has created here with this version of Bad News Bears South almost in the North Carolina Courage in Paul Riley. You look at what he's done, and it's just an amazing balance, and you get all this participation and all these goals from all these different people. It's an embarrassment of riches at one end, but at the same time, it's a great balancing act by him to push all the right buttons.
Yeah, no question. And I think this group has continued to evolve. So they came at you hard and fast in 2016, and that relentless pressure, you could have said relentless then. They just didn't have the sophistication or the experience to go with it at that time. It was a very young group. Now that group has come through, and they know what it's like. And I think one of the hardest things to do is, you build, you work, you fight to get to that championship. And then once you get to the top, how do you stay there? And how do you not let that be the top? How do you set a new peak that you're then trying to reach? And that is what Paul Riley is a master of. Because I think you absolutely give all of those players the credit that they deserve, but you give the system a lot of credit too. They all have to be incredibly bought in to what he wants to do, how he wants to play. And that seems to be the case in North Carolina.
And it's interesting to hear it discussed where it's basically it's a 4-2-2-2 and I don't think I've ever seen any other team have this stylistically. And when you've got the back four that they are, and then you have those other six who are just it's like trying to catch water through an open hand in a rainstorm at points. I mean, Paul Riley has really done something here where it's like, okay, I'm going to do this. You try to catch me. And it's interesting to see that formationally and then the controlled chaos that they create on offense.
It really is. Yeah. And it always looks funny every time we put the graphic up in our pregame broadcast, because it looks so narrow. You've got your four in the back, and then it's four in the midfield, two stacked right on top of each other, and then those two on the top. And truly, that is, they will tell you that they're going to come at you and they're going to try to beat you right down the gut. Now, that's not to say they don't use the width, and they do, but they're just so smart. I mean, if you think about the first couple goals in particular in the final yesterday, the way that they use the entire field, and the ball would start on the right and it would come central, or it would cross all the way to left and back and front. And I mean, Chicago's just reeling back and forth. They can't catch their balance. They're constantly on the back foot, and we're talking some world-class defenders and goalkeeper for the Chicago Red Stars in that game. And they just were outplayed, and they were beat by a better team. But I do think that formation is unique, and how they work that box midfield is really interesting. Just where they pull the players, whose responsibilities are more defensive, more attacking. They can all attack at any given time. But, the freedom within the system is there as well. And that's something Dabinia talked to us about, the player that was named MVP of the championship game. Just the freedom that she has and the confidence that she plays with. And I think all of these players play with. They're not playing and looking over their shoulder as if, did I make a mistake? Did I make a wrong pass? This is not where I was supposed to go. They are playing all out all the time. They're going to come at you. They're playing with confidence. And I think it's a challenge right now for any other team to try to figure out how to beat this team. Chicago had been the one to do it in the regular season anyway, but they did not do it in the postseason.
And when you look at the league now, I know that we've talked across the network about coming into the Women's World Cup. It was a key time to seize on that momentum for the NWSL. Now that the season is over and the World Cup is over, it's, I think, even more important now for the league to try to seize that momentum, especially with what happened internationally and with the women's national team. I think it's a really key moment now for the league going forward.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And they've seen such a great bump in terms of, I think, just interest, people wanting to know what's going on. And the more interest, the more that helps convince networks and different outlets to increase their coverage. And then the more eyeballs that then gets on it. I mean, attendance has been up across the league. I think we will see, with this package ESPN was able to pick up, and especially once the games were elevated onto ESPN2 and then the championship on ESPN, I think those numbers will be encouraging and hopefully a sign of where this league can go. But yeah, they have to capitalize, because next year is going to be another tough year. It's another year with a big Olympic event smack dab in the middle of the season with the international event, with the Olympics. So that's good and bad, right? Because you've got attention once again on women's soccer and the number one team in the world in the U.S. trying to get into the Olympics and have a better result than last time around. But then again, you're going to lose all those players. And so then when they come back, you want to capitalize, and then you want to be in a good position looking forward for those couple of years coming up where you don't have an international event to help bolster your attendance and the interest in the game and the league. And, expansion is a part of that. Louisville's already going to be involved in the league in 2021. Heard some rumors swirling that we could have a hometown team in Atlanta.
Right.
I would certainly be a big fan of that. So, I think it has to happen, but that's going to be a big thing to keep an eye on too, just in this league and how it moves forward.
And a part of that Grant Wall story was also adding Sacramento to the mix possibly as well. And I think that for the league going forward, it can't be expansion for expansion's sake, and it can't be just trying to chase after, and this is that delicate dance that you and I see when it comes to TV properties and markets. It has to be markets that will embrace the product and not putting something in a market because of market size. Say because Boston has tried to support teams, whether it's WUSA 1 or 2 and then things like that. You can't try to put a team in a top 10 media market just for the sake of having that audience there and not have the hometown fans go and embrace something like that. So I think that the NWSL chasing possibly with a Louisville being online, possibly a Sacramento, going to places where you're wanted and you can grasp that audience and grab hold of them, I think is also important too.
Yeah, sure. Look at Louisville. They've had great success with their crowds in USL and just interest there. I think that's a good point. But I do think also that's why one of the reasons the league hasn't rushed into expansion. Look, we're only at 9 teams this year. That's not enough. They need more. They know that. But they weren't willing to risk making a rash move that they did not feel would be best for the future. And, the league has been shorthanded. They haven't had a commissioner now, I think, for a couple of years. So I think that's also going to be something that they're going to need to work with. And their relationship with U.S. Soccer is going to be important too.
Yeah.
And if U.S. Soccer pulls out of the NWSL, what does that mean? What does that look like? In the long run, it could be better as the league tries to structure itself, as long as that financial element is still there and those U.S. national team players are still getting paid by U.S. Soccer, because that's obviously an important part. And one of the reasons that past leagues failed in the U.S., that they couldn't sustain those higher salaries all at once at the beginning. How do you think we had every single member of the U.S. winning World Cup team playing in NWSL? They had great incentive to be here. They want to play in the U.S., but when you think about some of those astronomical figures that some of the European clubs can offer, this was a great incentive for them to be able to stay here, and that needs to continue in some form or fashion. And then how do we keep those big marquee international players like a Sam Kerr? That's going to be another big discussion going forward too.
And I guess that's where NWSL 2.0 comes into play. Jen, as always, thanks for hanging out with us here on the network and on the show and pulling back the curtain when it comes to the NWSL. We will be banging on your door soon, and we are looking forward to hearing the studio audience that you have in the house ready to be there with you at every single moment. If you say something, that studio audience that comes in much like it does with me and Jason, we're looking forward to the bark in the park when it comes to hanging out with you and when it comes to everything.
He stayed quiet today. The dog stayed quiet today, so it's just me. But thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Before
we go, for those that want to follow you on social media and keep an eye on everything that you're doing, how do they do it?
At Jenn Hildreth on Twitter. That's the best way to go. I'm also on Instagram, but I'm hardly ever on there, and I don't even remember my handle. So let's just stick with Twitter. Give me some more followers there. There we go. At Jenn Hildreth.
At Jenn Hildreth. And we'll be back with more on the show after the break.
This is what matters. This is beyond X's and O's. This is the difference mutual respect makes. This is what character looks like. This is what defines us in Georgia. This is sportsmanship. School sports. It's not the outcome that matters most, but the way the games are played. This message presented by the Georgia High School Association and the Georgia Athletic Directors Association.
As a business owner, you know that every year brings new challenges and opportunities. The success of your business demands expertise and focus. And Country Financial can help you keep that focus by helping ensure you have the right insurance protection in place to meet your goals. Jason Wright can help you create a customized insurance plan that has coverages designed just for your business. Give Jason a call at 678-568-6871 or reach him on Facebook at Jason Wright Agency. Coverages vary by state. Policies issued by Country Mutual Insurance Company, Bloomington, Illinois.
Every year, millions of Americans are exposed to a contagious virus.
What is this virus? It's stigma.
Stigma promotes an environment of shame,
fear, and silence,
which prevents millions of people from seeking help.
But there's good news.
The National Alliance on Mental Illness believes stigma towards mental illness is 100% curable.
So do yourself and everyone a favor.
Go to curestigma.org and get tested for stigma.
If you've been hurt in a car wreck, contact my friend Steve Apolinski of Apolinski & Associates. He's been representing individuals for over 30 years throughout Georgia and Alabama. Email him at steve@aa-legal.com or call him 24/7 at 404-377-9191. The initial consultation is free.
Back to Women's Soccer Weekly. Lots to dig into, but first, thank you to Jenn Hildreth for taking the time out to chat with John earlier this week. Make sure you're following Jenn on Twitter at Jenn Hildreth for all the latest when it comes to the NWSL, to the women's game in general. And there's a lot going on at the moment, and we're going to talk about some of the updates from around the NWSL and the U.S. women's national team that happened later in the week. The big one on the team side of things, Sam Kerr not coming back to the Chicago Red Stars for 2020. It's not a shock because these rumors had started during the Women's World Cup, but Stephen Goff of the Washington Post broke the news on Friday. She has informed the club she's not coming back to Chicago for 2020. Where she is going, that part's unknown. Chelsea was a club that was linked to her during the World Cup with a lucrative offer. Others have popped up in recent weeks. The Real Madrid new club that is in La Liga is one that has popped up as they start to maybe try to build a Galacticos type of squad. Keep an eye on where Sam Kerr could end up, but she will not be in NWSL next year, and it's very unlikely that she would go back to the W League to play in her native Australia during the offseason. I think a lot of people are waiting to see who she signs with and when that occurs. On the league side, and maybe partially in response to that news about Sam Kerr and that ongoing conversation, because it's not exactly a shock that this is happening because of those offers, because of increased spending around the world in the women's game. The league has made a move to be a little more competitive in that front. They have approved a big increase to the salary cap going forward. It's nearly a 20% increase, up to $650,000 per team. The minimum salary up to $20,000 per year. The maximum salary up to $50,000 per year. Now, included in that cap is the quote cap hit for the U.S. and Canadian Federation players. The U.S. players will count as $31,500 towards the team's cap. Canadian national team players count as $26,000 towards the cap. And these are players, not just national team players, but players who are allocated from the federations, and the federations are picking up a salary component for them. The allocated U.S. women's national team players are due to be paid between $70,000 and $75,000 per year for their NWSL play next season. That's in addition to their national team pay. And we know that there's negotiations about a new CBA and everything going on the U.S. women's side. The NWSL component is separate, but there is overlap in these conversations, so keep that in mind. The biggest news, in my opinion, is that the league has approved $300,000 in allocation money per team to go above the maximum salary. This works kind of like TAM in MLS. It can be traded. It can be used as an asset. So teams who might not want to spend this can trade it, and teams can acquire more than the $300,000. That could get really interesting as the shackles have come off a little bit in the NWSL and how teams will be constructed. There are select situations that could trigger additional allocation money, such as $100,000 additionally if a team loses a U.S. allocated player in the expansion draft. Well, there's probably going to be an expansion draft because just waiting on an announcement at this point, it sounds like Sacramento will be joining the league for 2020. Keep an eye on the Equalizer, equalizersoccer.com for all of the latest. Jeff Kassouf and all of the members of the Equalizer team do an amazing job covering the women's game on a day-in, day-out basis. There's a subscription process for the Equalizer. It is 100% worth it. They have monthly and yearly options. But make sure you're following all of their social media accounts because they are on top of everything that pops in the women's game. The Sacramento announcement is one to keep an eye on when that happens. This allocation money, there are some criteria involved in being able to use it for players. Here's the criteria. You had to be an NWSL Best 11 or Second 11 player for either of the two most recent seasons, 2018-2019. International players who have more than 3 caps for their national team in the prior 2 years are also eligible. The NWSL MVP, Golden Boot, Rookie of the Year, Defender of the Year winner for either of the last 2 seasons are eligible. Domestic players who have completed at least 5 seasons in the NWSL are eligible. I like that addition for players outside of the national team pool, but stalwarts with their club team. Players who were formerly designated as allocated players by the U.S. or Canada, unless the player refused that option to be allocated. Those players are eligible. So if you were part of the pool, but then things changed, you're not part of the pool, and it wasn't by your decision, teams can use allocation money on your salary. Players previously on a contract that included allocation money will also be eligible for that down the road. Clubs are also now allowed to sign players to multi-year deals, not just one-year deals with a one-year option. That's what everybody has been on. So it's kind of a 2-year deal, but not really. The club has the option to pick you up for the second year or not. Year-round housing also now mandated by the league. So things have increased the security for NWSL players. There aren't limitations on housing stipends or car stipends, and you're not going to have to, look for a new place to live after the season's over. And that's been the case for a lot of players. So you're definitely going to have a more professional environment now. And this is a huge addition for the NWSL and a very important part of the growth. Another big part of that growth is the fact that now you're kind of growing up when it comes to the world transfer market. I think the world transfer market's growing up as well, with more clubs, more leagues who are going to be interested in these sorts of things. But NWSL teams can now pay transfer fees to acquire players using that allocation money. There's no limit on the number of transfer fees a team can pay in a season, but they do have that allocation budget limit. Teams can also sell a player to a club outside the NWSL and either retain the player's NWSL rights or keep a portion of the transfer fee. U.S. and Canadian allocated players are not eligible to be transferred out of the league. Things are moving in the right direction, I think, in all these fronts. This is a good bit of progress for the NWSL, and I think it will keep them as one of the major leagues in the world and potentially the biggest and best league in the world. I think there's some valid arguments both for and against that. And until we have things like a World Club Cup, until we see more international matches between NWSL teams and international club teams, I think it's very speculative. But the NWSL, in my opinion, should be the best women's league in the world and has all the makings of doing that. These are steps in the right direction to doing it. Future expansion will be as well. Sacramento is a great addition when that happens, but there's also rumors of other cities that are interested. Cincinnati has made it clear that they are interested. Atlanta has talked about being interested, and There's been reports from Grant Wall of Sports Illustrated that Atlanta could be looking at 2021 as early as that. Little bit of cold water thrown on that this week with a quote from Brett Jukes, the Chief Communications Officer for AMB Sports and Entertainment, but also didn't rule it out. There are things that the league still has to answer, and one will be the relationship going forward with the U.S. Soccer Federation. That management contract that U.S. Soccer has with the NWSL is now up at the end of the season. What does the relationship look like going forward? It's very important. The league wouldn't be here right now without that support. They still need to work in the same direction, but maybe the NWSL owners need to take a little more responsibility for the growth of the league and not leave it to the federation who, I mean, let's be honest, the league is not their number one priority. When you're talking about women's soccer, the national team program is their number one priority. So the league has helped that, and that's why it's been supported, but it's not the end-all, be-all for the federation. They did, the federation we're speaking of, make their hire official for the new manager for the U.S. women's national team. Vlatko Andonovski succeeds Jill Ellis as the U.S. women's national team manager, and he gets straight to work because there are matches this week, Thursday in Columbus, Ohio against Sweden, Sunday in Jacksonville, Florida against Costa Rica. Vlatko Andonovski was introduced to the media in New York on Monday. He has also named his first roster for these friendlies. A few new faces, and partially down to injuries with some of the stalwarts of the U.S. women's national team program. But 3 new players who are called into their first ever senior national team camp. Washington Spirit goalkeeper Aubrey Bledsoe, Paris Saint-Germain defender Alana Cook, who is a dual national who also spent time in a camp with England but has not played for England or been cap-tied to England yet. Sky Blue FC defender Imani Dorsey has also been called in for her first senior national team camp. Now, all 3 of these players have been part of youth national team camps, but not at the senior level. 2 players are making their return after previously being part of the national team program. Midge Purse of the Portland Thorns and Lynn Williams of the North Carolina Courage. Andonovski also is going to hold an identification training camp in December to get a look at new players who could join the team in January. Now, that's an interesting camp because the World Cup players are contractually excluded from that camp. It's part of a mandatory rest period. So it's almost like a fresh tryout for new players, for many players. It's going to be intriguing to see who Andonovski calls in, how many NWSL players get that call in, how many players who are playing outside of the NWSL, because we've seen quite a few players not go through the draft process coming out of college or not go to college and go play overseas. That's happening more and more. Andonovski, with the Alana Cook call in, makes you think that he's not going to be as reliant as Jill Ellis has been in the past when it comes to the NWSL. You also have to remember, though, Andonovski was the manager at Reign FC, knows the league inside and out, and will potentially have some players that he has either managed before or players that he's looked up to in the league and thought were quality professionals that maybe Jill Ellis had not worked with before. And every time you get a managerial change, you're going to see some changes in that squad. Can't wait to see what this looks like because, you know, you do have an Olympics in 2020. That makes it a little awkward for Andonovski. Instead of starting a new cycle completely fresh, you have a little bit of a carryover. And questions like Carly Lloyd, will she be part of that Olympic squad? Other veterans, Alex Morgan, who is going to be away from the national team for a while she's pregnant with her first child, could potentially be part of the Olympic squad. Andonovski said that he's not even going to get into that until after Alex has given birth. So the U.S. women's national team, it's an interesting year coming up, and now they have a new leader in Vlatko Andonovski to carry them into a new era of sorts. It's been an amazing 2 cycles for Jill Ellis with 2 World Cups. Can Andonovski keep that going? Can the NWSL continue its growth and be a breeding ground for new players for the women's national team program, players we maybe haven't seen before or maybe haven't seen in a while? can the North Carolina Courage continue to be the dominant force in women's professional soccer in the United States? Can Sacramento hit the ground running? Lots of questions over the next few months because this offseason for the NWSL is a big one. We talked about it last year on Soccer Down Here that we hoped that the NWSL would be in a position to grow from a potential World Cup bounce. They didn't make any moves to grow ahead of the World Cup, but there was a pronounced elevation in attendance, I think in interest, in sponsorship, thanks to Budweiser and hopefully others. The NWSL is in a better place after this 2019 Women's World Cup and after this 2019 season. How does it capitalize on all of that? That's the big question going forward and something we'll be talking about a lot here on the Women's Soccer Weekly. Thanks again to our guest, Jenn Hildreth. Thanks to all of you for listening. We'll be back next week as we recap a couple of friendlies, the first two in the Vlatko Andonovski era for the U.S. women's national team. Until then...